You know, it's not every day a film turns 25 and still feels like it could have been made yesterday. So I'm really curious to dig into these articles about Haine you sent over and unpack why it still resonates so strongly with audiences even after all these years.
Well, one thing that makes Haine so captivating is its raw honesty. It really lays bare the realities of life for those living on the margins of society.
Yeah.
And it doesn't shy away from tackling those really difficult issues. You know, police brutality, economic disparity, the struggles of marginalized communities.
Right. It all feels very immediate and in your face. And from what I'm gathering from these articles, the setting of the film, the banlieues, seems to play a huge role. But for those of us who might only picture, say, the Eiffel Tower when we think of France,
Sure.
could you give us a better sense of what these areas are really like?
Absolutely. So imagine the outskirts of Paris, far from all the tourist attractions. These banlieues are characterized by large housing projects. Often neglected and misunderstood, they represent a side of France that's often overlooked. And yeah, the social and economic inequalities are really striking.
And it's interesting you say overlooked because one of the articles really emphasized how these areas, I mean, they're not just geographically separated from the city center, they're almost intentionally isolated socially and physically. The article even used the term spatial segregation, which is pretty powerful. With that kind of division, it's no wonder tensions run high.
Exactly. And that tension, that sense of isolation, that's really at the core of Haine. And Kassovitz, the director, he doesn't just depict it. He immerses you in it. I mean, he lived with the actors in the banlieue for 3 months before they even started shooting.
Wow, 3 months. Talk about commitment to authenticity. And you can really feel that authenticity, especially in those stark black and white shots. Speaking of which, that was a pretty bold choice for a film made in 1995, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, back then, color film was pretty much the standard, especially for a film dealing with contemporary issues.
Right.
But choosing to shoot in black and white, especially combined with that handheld camera work, it wasn't just an aesthetic choice.
So there was a reason behind it. What was Kassovitz going for?
Well, he wanted to strip away any distractions and bring the viewer face to face with the raw emotions of these characters, the frustrations, the realities of their lives. The black and white film, it has this timeless quality, a certain rawness, and that handheld style. It's like you're right there on the streets with them, experiencing their world firsthand.
And it's not just the visuals, is it? There's that constant pressure, that ticking clock throughout the film. It really amps up the intensity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That ticking clock motif, yeah, several articles mention that.
Yeah.
Kassovitz used it very deliberately to create this feeling of being trapped.
By time.
By time. By circumstance, by their environment in the banlieues.
It's like that pressure cooker feeling, you know, like the walls are closing in. I can see how that would resonate with audiences even if they've never even set foot in a banlieue.
Exactly. That sense of urgency, that feeling of being on the edge, it's something a lot of us can relate to, even if the context is totally different.
Definitely. And speaking of being on the edge, these characters are often labeled as rebels, but I feel like Haine does something more nuanced with them.
Oh, for sure.
They're not just angry young men with nothing better to do.
It's like Kassovitz is playing with those labels, right?
Yeah.
He's taking those classic angry young man tropes and subverting them.
Flipping them on their head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One article even pointed out all these subtle nods to iconic rebel figures.
Like who?
Well, there's a nod to Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. And the way certain images are used, it's like Kassovitz is acknowledging those tropes. But at the same time, he's doing something totally different with them.
Oh, totally. Like that scene with Vinz practicing his lines in the mirror. It's like he's trying on that whole taxi driver persona, but it just doesn't fit.
Exactly. And that's what's so brilliant about Haine. These characters, they're not rebelling just for the sake of it. They're reacting to a system that's failed them. A system that constantly tells them they're worthless, that pushes them to the margins. Their anger, their frustration, it all stems from that, from social injustice.
So it's less about romanticizing rebellion and more about understanding where that anger comes from.
Exactly. And I think that's why Haine still feels so relevant today. You know, it's not just a time capsule of 1990s France. It's a timeless story about the consequences of social inequality.
It's a story that feels, unfortunately, all too relevant today. And that relevance, it didn't go unnoticed back in 95, did it? This wasn't just some niche film that flew under the radar.
Not at all. It sparked a national conversation in France. One article even mentioned that the prime minister at the time, he actually screened Haine for his entire cabinet.
Wow.
It was a real moment. You know? Like suddenly the banlieues and the struggles of the people living there, it was thrust into the national spotlight.
It's amazing to think a film could have that kind of impact. And it wasn't just about starting a debate, was it? It actually helped change the way people thought about these issues. Like, for example, the term black blanc bleu.
Right.
Before the film, it was often used as a derogatory term, a way to describe the multicultural youth in the banlieues in a negative light. But after La Haine, it took on a whole new meaning, didn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible how that happened. What was once meant to divide and marginalize, it became a way of highlighting shared experiences, a way of expressing solidarity.
It's like the film gave a voice to those who'd been silenced for so long.
Exactly. It forced people to confront some uncomfortable truths about race, about identity, about social exclusion.
And those conversations are still ongoing today, which I think speaks volumes. So we've covered a lot of ground here. What's really sticking with you after this deep dive into La Haine?
You know, it's funny, but it's always the ending that stays with me.
Yeah.
That sense of hopelessness, the unresolved tension, and Hubert's line, hatred breeds hatred. It just makes you wonder, does the film offer any solutions? Or is it more of a warning, like a mirror held up to society, showing us what happens when we fail to address these issues?
It's a chilling thought for sure, but maybe that's the power of La Haine. It doesn't give you easy answers.
No.
It makes you sit with the discomfort and confront these complex issues head on.
Exactly.
Well, I, for one, am incredibly glad we had this conversation today. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
Of course, it was my pleasure.
It's clear that La Haine is so much more than just a film. It's an experience that sparks reflection, conversation, and hopefully positive change. And for a film to still have that power 25 years later, that's something special.